Okay, good afternoon. I see there's a couple of people who have already joined. If someone can just type a comment in the chat, please, so I know that you are hearing me. Val, there's Val. How's it, Val? Nice to see you again. Okay, we'll just wait a couple more seconds and then we'll get cracking. Dolores, how's it, Dolores? Nice to see you. Okay, I think let's get going. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to today's HR Indaba Network Webinar, which today is proudly brought to you by HFMtalentindex. I'm going to put a message up in the chat quickly. If you could all let us know where you are from and what you do within your company, that would be great. For those of you who don't yet know me, my name's Nick Smith from CHRO South Africa. I would like to just, during the course of this webinar, I'd like to encourage everyone to ask as many questions as possible during the session, which we will endeavor to answer in the 15 minutes or so at the end of this. If we don't get around to answering them all, we will ensure that all the questions are answered, and I will send you a personal mail in the coming week with your answer. So today's topic is performance management and neuroscience, 360-degree feedback on steroids. Traditional 360-degree feedback is a well-established methodology used as part of performance management and career development. HFMtalentindex helps companies to implement 360-degree feedback strategies described as 360 degrees on steroids, aligning three critical components. That's potential, learning agility, and performance. We will hear from industry experts who will outline how organizations leverage this enhanced 360-degree feedback methodology to reap outstanding benefits, and why Uber's HR team championed this approach to 360-degree feedback underpinned by the principles of neuroscience. We will then be presented with a case study outlining how upgrading a traditional performance review process with this novel 360-degree feedback approach has helped Uber transform the antagonistic qualities of traditional performance reviews into an effective individual and organizational development journey. So I'm joined today by three fantastic panelists. I'll ask them all just to quickly jump on camera, please. Oh, there we go. Fantastic. So we have Jaintheran Naidoo. He is the country manager of HFMtalentindex. We have Linda Roos, head of human capital at Uber, and Tato Matlala, HR business partner of Uber. So just very quickly before we get started and before Jaintheran gets started, I'm just going to run a quick poll, which you will see appearing in your in the chat now. There we go. And we are asking, how are 360s perceived in your organization? Are they highly effective, somewhat effective, with ambivalence? Is it a tick box exercise? Are they irritating? Do they scare you? Or do not just do it? So I'm going to give you sort of 10, 15 seconds to get those answers coming through. And then we will comment on them during the course of the session. Okay, so there's two sort of leaders. I'll give you a couple more secs. Okay, and I will end the poll now. Okay, so we have 29% believe it's somewhat effective, 27% say you don't do it at all, and then the rest is sort of spread out between. So hopefully by the end of today's session, those perceptions might have changed, hopefully have changed. Yeah, so cool, let's get going. First up, we have Jaintheran. I'm just going to put up your slides and then over to you, Jaintheran.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Cool, and there we go. Cool, Tato, Linda, and I will jump off camera.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to have all of you here today. I see we have quite a number of people joining us. I must say it's really encouraging to see that there's quite a large number of people that are engaging in 360s. Even if you say they are somewhat effective, I think that is still quite encouraging. Okay. But let's talk performance. And one of the questions that we get asked fairly regularly is it still relevant to focus on performance reviews and on performance as such? And I would answer that with a very simple statement. Yes, it is, and for various reasons. The first and most obvious reason is that organizations exist because they need to perform, and organizations that are not performing are obviously not going to survive. Okay. However, if we want that performance to be sustainable, we also need to recognize that performance cannot be focused solely just on the bottom line and on the hard KPIs. We also need to focus on the human element of performance. Okay? And we have seen a resurgence of the consideration of humanity within the workplace, not just from the fifth industrial revolution, but also very nicely illustrated with our current situation, and that is the COVID lockdown situation. Organizations very quickly were reminded that if you don't pay attention to your employees, if you don't empathize with employees, then you are likely not going to get the best out of employees. So how do we introduce that human element into performance considerations? By also looking at what or how is the individual performing. And another way of sustaining performance in the organization is by also creating a performance culture. So not just focusing on the numbers and so on just because we want to remain profitable, but also nurturing and fostering a performance culture within the organization. If we want to be sustainable into the future, then we also need to recognize that the challenges that we face, the demands of the organization, even the purpose of the organization is unlikely to remain static, and things are going to be changing and changing even more rapidly in future. So how do we make sure that individuals in the organization are actually equipped to handle change, and the organization itself is also equipped to handle change? By focusing on performance and on individual performance, we are then demonstrating to individuals that we do value your contribution to the organization. And this is just one way of actually making sure that employees are engaged. And we all know that engaged employees are likely going to be more productive employees, and then will be more comfortable actually focusing on developing their innate talents and potential. Okay. Performance should also focus on what the individual can do, and also the individual's aspirations and their career progression as well. And a holistic performance process should also provide those insights into personal development as well. So when we made that transition from a more traditional top-down type of review process, we definitely made some strides in the right direction. So sitting down with one's manager regularly, once a quarter, whatever the case may be, can be seen as quite a punitive and maybe even threatening context, not ideally created for development. So making that transition into a 360 approach was certainly a move in the right direction. It certainly helped reduce what we might perceive to be a threat situation. Now, Tato is going to tell us a little bit more about threat versus reward in a little while. But basically what we say is that if an individual is experiencing threat, they are unlikely to learn or to want to develop. So the introduction of a 360 methodology did help to make that transition from threat to more of a reward type of situation. However, there are some difficulties with a traditional 360 approach. The one difficulty is that it focuses squarely on what the individual can do and is doing right now. And it doesn't really provide much scope to answer the question, what can the individual do in future? And by focusing purely on actual performance, we are also neglecting to try and uncover what are the individual's innate talents. Okay, so that's the first difficulty that we could that we can express with traditional 360s. The second is one that has already been touched upon in the poll, namely that often a performance review process and a 360 process might be viewed as merely a tick box exercise. So the organization might view this as something that we have to do once or twice a year just to remain compliant. It's a little bit of a distraction from our operational focus, not really seeing how it adds value. Okay. So while HR might champion the process, might understand how this is going to add value, not just to the organization, but to individuals, there often is a little bit of disconnect between HR fraternity and the rest of the organization. And this then leads to what we might interpret as a siloed effect of 360s, in that they are just viewed in and of themselves and not appreciated for the value that they can add to the rest of the talent management lifecycle. For example, how does reviewing performance impact on our recruitment practices? How does it impact on succession? Or even more largely, how does it impact on organizational design and planning? What if we could reimagine 360s and reinvent 360s? What are some of the things that could be on that wish list? For me, one of the things that can be on that list is, how about if we focus on what the individual can possibly do, not just on what they are doing right now, but also on what can they do in future? And then secondly, what if we expanded the focus and thought not just about the individual in his or her role right now, but can we get an indication of how will this individual respond if we were to add to this role, change the role, if the organization were to adapt and be redesigned to an extent? So in other words, how agile can this person be? And what is the future focus of this individual? So that is what we actually aim to do when we talk about a 360 on steroids. So our 360 on steroids will give you an indication of what can the person do right now. In other words, what is the person's innate competency potential? Secondly, we will once again give you an indication of what is the demonstrated performance right now, and that is provided by the traditional 360 element of the process. And thirdly, and probably most exciting, is it's going to give us an indication of what is this individual's ability to actually develop effective behaviors in the face of new experiences and new situations. So while the demonstrated performance and the competency potential is telling us how can you perform and how are you performing in your role right now, we are now also able to answer the question, if your role changes, if the organization is adapting and changing, if the environment is changing, how quickly will this individual become effective? Okay? So we like to call our 360 on steroids the develop. As you can see, it's named very, very imaginatively. What will you get from a develop report? So firstly, you're going to get a perspective, a bird's eye view of what is this individual's potential and what is their actual performance. Okay? And in an ideal situation, we want to identify individuals that have both high potential and are performing well in all of those areas. In other words, the top right hand of this particular matrix that I'm sharing with you right now. Okay. This is typically used in a coaching discussion, and typically we will focus on the top left-hand side, the strengthen area, because this indicates areas that the individual has high potential but has not yet demonstrated performance in those particular areas. Okay. In addition, we want to delve a little bit deeper. We want to get an indication of, for this particular competency that we are talking about, what can we expect from the individual? So in other words, what is the person's likely behavior, their potential? And then we also can compare this to how are you actually performing right now. By doing this, we can set realistic development goals because we understand what can be expected from this individual. And we are also helping to improve the individual's self-awareness if it already wasn't well developed. Okay. Then we have the third element, namely learning agility. And we are basically saying to the person, this is your innate ability to actually become effective in the face of change, of new experiences, in the face of difficulty and so on. And we also acknowledge that you do have the capacity to improve this ability. Okay, so that's what the blue area indicates. So just to recap, if we consider a more traditional 360 approach, the outcome of that approach is that we are able to identify our high performers from our not so high performers. However, when we add another element, namely when we start considering what are these individuals' potential for these various areas, then we can also comment on who are our high potentials in the organization versus our low potentials. And all is taken into consideration then allows us an opportunity to start thinking and talking about succession planning. We can start answering questions about who do we need to redeploy in the organization. And we can also start maybe reflecting on, did we make any errors in the recruitment process? So who are those individuals that we need to think about another plan for because they just don't fit the organizational culture, they don't fit their current roles, etc., namely the miscast individuals. Okay. Now you know that we've also added a third element, namely learning agility. And as we've tried to illustrate here, now we have almost a 3D view of the individual. Not only do we get a sense of how well can you possibly perform in your current role and how well are you performing in your current role, we're also getting an indication of if we consider you for almost any role in the organization, what is your potential and your likely performance? In other words, your learning agility. Research has shown us that there is a strong correlation, strong positive correlation of learning agility with both potential and performance in the organization. So we know that the stars in the organization are also the ones with the higher learning agility. So by adding that element, we have one more consideration which to use when we're talking about succession planning, development, career planning, and so on. Okay. All of this might sound wonderful, but I can just imagine lots of you are asking the question or thinking, yes, but how easy is all of this to do? And once again, Tato will give us an indication of how easy it is to implement. But just in a nutshell, the three broad things to consider if you want to implement something like this is, firstly, we need to be very cognizant of what are the best practices involved here. And those of you that have been involved in 360s, you will appreciate how important it is to be cognizant of the best practices. So questions such as, what is the organizational culture? How ready is the organization for this type of intervention? What is the maturity level of the organization? And then also, how ready are individuals in the organization for this type of intervention? How do we ensure that we actually get buy-in for this type of process? Okay? And if we don't have buy-in, we know that the process is doomed to fail. And can we also build in provision for reiterations of this process? We know that this process is not going to be as valuable as it can be if it is not followed by successive iterations, so that we can gauge whether there is improvement, we can gauge whether any decisions that we've made, any redesign that we have implemented has actually been to the benefit of the organization. Okay. So you can see that this process has become a little bit more complex from running a traditional 360. There are a few more steps involved. Okay. And I think if you were trying to attempt to do this manually, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to run this manually. So a strong recommendation is that this entire process is automated, and secondly, also integrated, and maybe even automatically integrated, so that we don't need to sit down with every single individual's potential, performance, and learning agility information, and then try to reach an integrated decision about where they stand right now. Okay. And then we also need to consider what is most appropriate. Should we try to run this internally, or should we rather outsource this to a third party? And there can be various reasons that an organization will decide to outsource this. One of them could be that there might be a perception that this could be a more fair and objective process if it was run by an external third party, or the organization could decide that we don't currently have capacity to run this internally. Let's rather leave it to to the experts. So there are pros and cons of both processes, but eventually what we do want to attain is a situation where the organization is empowered and driven to actually run this internally, because that is where you're likely to get most benefit from the process. I beg your pardon, wrong direction. Okay. So that is my message for you today. I do expect that there is a lot to think about, and maybe we can discuss a little bit later on. But Tato and Linda have a lot to also add to the discussion. Over to you.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks, Jaintheran. Some really great insights there for people to start thinking about. I'm just going to stop that. I'm going to ask Linda to please jump on camera with me. Going to make us a little bit bigger. Cool. There we go. So, Linda, you and your HR team have really championed this 360-degree approach within Uber. I'd like to sort of try and unlock that or unpack that a little more. So, sure. in lots of organizations, performance reviews are seen as a tick box exercise. How does Uber view performance reviews? What value, whether commercial or human, does Uber expect to get from these activities?
So for Uber, we view performance reviews, and in particular 360 reviews, but performance management rather, as quite a significant culture shaper. I know it's become a bit of a cliche, but we are working towards a growth mindset culture, and our performance management system had to change significantly in order for that to be possible. We've moved away from ratings, and for us, the performance management system should not only achieve commercial results, which Tata will illustrate to you it has, but also help people achieve personal and professional mastery. And if people can achieve that and perform to their full potential, it stands to reason that they are going to perform well. And so we see it as a major culture shaper. It's also very powerful in driving change. I've always been a fan of the old Gleicher formula for change. If you can help people see the dissatisfaction with the status quo rather, and a vision for how it could be different, and also how we can help them change, then you are going to have quite a powerful formula for changing in what we know is an extremely volatile world at the moment.
Cool. And then why HFMtalentindex? Why their 360 on steroids approach?
So, you can't manage what you can't measure. And we wanted a scientific tool to help us do that. We did not want a DIY performance management 360 system, because scientific data is significantly more insightful, and data is a prerequisite in our view for insight. And once you can give people insight, they can use that insight to drive change and improvement. And that just wasn't going to be possible with a DIY approach. And it also wasn't going to be possible with an approach that doesn't show them that they have the capacity to change. So for us, we've been partnering with HFM for quite a long time. We partner with them for not only 360s, but also selection. And whilst we're working in a sort of brownfield situation, you've got a lot of people that you've had for many years. We are also able to now make sure that the people we bring on board have got the right potential for the role. And once we know what their potential is, we know how to help them grow it. So for me, it was really about partnering with a scientific, data provider for us, and doing that externally, because I do believe it has a great deal more credibility.
Okay, cool, thanks. And then how does talent measurement support your talent management strategy within Uber?
So, as I said, you can't, once you've got people in your organization, you can't rely on guesswork to understand where they need development. You've got to know what they are inherently capable of doing, and what it is that they need to improve in. And the HFM product, I think, has been a very credible, very professional, very easy to use product, and they've also been incredible partners to us. Not only in terms of, we don't have a relationship where they kind of check in on us every couple of months to see if we're still going to pay the invoice this month, but rather they're really the tool really is very integrated with our strategy. And because we have such a growth mindset focus, the learning agility component was very important for us, so that people can see that you may not at the moment be performing to that potential, but you can. So it's really helped us with our talent strategy. We had an employee in a position where he was in sales, and his potential for listening was really very low. We didn't understand why he was performing below the required standard. And we did an assessment, and we realized, gosh, this guy shouldn't really be selling. And we moved him into a different role where he is now thriving, which is far more aligned with what his potential is. So we've actually seen it in practice, not that time, but number of times. So we trust it. And we know we can rely on the data to help us make the right decisions.
Okay, awesome. And then obviously Uber is definitely a high pressure space, particularly these days. Thankfully for you, how do your talent strategies translate to corporate performance?
So I think again, I'm going to probably let Tato show you the data again, but certainly we have managed to make significantly better hiring decisions, significantly better development decisions, as I've illustrated with the example I showed you. And we now know that we've got credible information to work with. As I think Jaintheran will probably tell you, because that's what we realized, is that you cannot make, for example, a hiring decision purely on a CV and a reference and an interview. Even you've got pretty much as much as a thumb suck chance of making the right decision, and the same counts for assessing potential. You cannot do it without independent scientific data.
Okay, cool. Linda, there are some questions that have come up in the pre-survey, which we will get to a little bit later. But thanks for your insights. I think it's about time that we call Tato on. Let's get Tato up. There we go. There she is. So Tato's going to run through a really cool case study of how this new approach has been effective in their organization, as Linda mentioned. So I'll jump off camera, and Tato, over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Hi, everyone. So, like Linda said, with traditional performance management, we needed to move to one that encourages a growth mindset. And the first thing that we needed to do in order to achieve that was to really understand where our people are and what it is that they want. So we had to help them see that the traditional performance management is no longer working for us the way it did in the past, and that we needed to move to one that encourages and enables them to perform to their potential. And so the first thing we introduced was very risky. We did away with ratings, with numeric ratings, and we introduced a system where it is self-led and self-directed, where what you give out as your input and how you behave according to our values makes up your performance score at the end of the day, and that is in points. So I'll touch on that a bit later. But because we knew that we needed a performance management that encourages a growth mindset, we had to look at a threat and a reward point of view. And so our design of our performance ecosystem as a whole is based around the SCAF model. So we literally looked at each of the domains with regards to our business, where we are. We looked at it from a leadership perspective. We looked at it from our values and how they are set up. We looked at it from the policies and how we write our policies. And we said, do all these things currently as they are affect any of these? And if they do, how do they create a threat? And how will they create a reward response? So a typical example would be in a traditional performance management setting, you sit across your manager, and your manager then tells you 12 months of your performance, or if you do it biannually, then 6 months worth of your performance is reduced to a single rating. And if you are lucky, then you will negotiate a higher score. If not, then, so essentially it brings more threat. That whole thinking of, oh gosh, tomorrow I need to wake up and go for my performance review. I'm going to have to prove that I did this. I need to remember that 4 months down the line, this happened, and therefore I'll edit and try negotiate. So that whole experience does not do good to our brain. So we all know just the basics of a brain, that once my prefrontal cortex, which is my thinking brain right at the front, when that is threatened by any feelings that are not good for me, like I'm going to have to negotiate and fight for my KPI and whatever, already my feelings have they can overpower my thinking brain. And therefore, I cannot be logic in any of those discussions. So we wanted to really do away with those things. Do I have clear goals? For example, when we look at certainty, do I know what I need to deliver on? And what I do need to deliver on when it does happen at the end of the year, am I guaranteed that the process will be fair, that it will be objective? How do I relate to my manager? How's our relationship? Do I have autonomy in how I do my work, in how I carry out my tasks? So all those little things we really carefully looked at, and we designed a performance management system that is called Partner for Performance. And in Partner for Performance, we literally seek to harness the relationship of power of partnerships, a partnership between a manager, where the manager is leader as coach, and an employee. And so because we are designing an ecosystem that encourages a growth mindset, and we've already looked at the threats and the rewards of this ecosystem, we had to go back and look at who are we doing it for. So we know that we're doing it for a human being. And if we're wanting people to perform to their potential, what are the things about a person that needs to be in balance and in harmony? And how do we still, in our design, make sure that the ecosystem allows for this? So we looked at the 5 domains. And again, on each domain, we went and looked at socially, how are we as a company? How does our culture and values speak to our social fabric as a company? What do our people want? What do how do our employees relate with one another? What are our recognition systems look like? Can we publicly recognize people? So that social fabrics that makes us an Uber people, how does that link into performing? We looked at the physical aspect from a wellness perspective. So whilst we will not get you a gym membership, what are the policies that are there to make sure that physically you are healthy? Is the culture and the environment conducive to people remaining healthy, or do we stress them? Do we cause them to get sick? We had really to look at our sick leave, and how does that look like? Do our people use their sick leave as soon as they get it? If they do, we needed to look at those things. What could be the problem? So each of the domains, we carefully unpacked it the way we unpacked the SCAF model. And we said, if all these things are in harmony, and we've created an ecosystem that makes sure that all these things are respected, then we believe that people will perform to their potential. So whilst I'm not going to touch on each and every one individually, I'd like to touch on the intellectual side, because this is where we really partnered with HFM, and they helped us walk the journey. So from an intellectual perspective, we said, okay, so everyone has cognitive abilities, everyone has a brain, and everyone has some potential, and people are just fundamentally intelligent. So how can we make sure that we understand each and every person's potential, and over and above their potential, how are they performing against that potential? And this is where the HFM Develop 360 really gave us those powerful insights. So what I'm going to go through with you now is one of the teams that we walked the journey with, that they allowed us to pilot Partner for Performance before we could bring it to the wider business. So we had a couple of teams, and this one particular team, which is the one that I'll be showing you now, was really a team that when we found them, they were quite sure, they were fraught, to put it into perspective. So they had unhealthy relationships. They didn't trust one another. They didn't want to collaborate. They did not trust their manager. They had accountability issues. Nobody wanted to account for anything. And the impact of all those things was a high absence. And because I'm also an HR business partner to this team, I also understood what made them, what resulted in all these things. And really it came down to the system and the environment in which they had to perform in. So when we looked at their potential as individuals and as a team, they had an average potential to their roles, which means they can do the job as much as anyone can do the job. But their results as a team did not reflect that. So they were underperforming, and reasonably because they were never at work. When they were at work, they had a lot of errors, they had a lot of mistakes, and that created a high overtime spend because there was a lot of repeat work, or there was work that would be in a backlog where when they have to return to work, then they have to do that. They had a very low team morale. So for example, if somebody has just a little cough, but now it's obviously COVID, so we'll excuse that. But if somebody had just a little cough, then yes, I'm sick today, so I'm not going to go in. And somebody else then would then pay themselves because Tato wasn't in last week. Therefore, I'm not gonna go in so that Tato can go in and deal with that backlog. So there were all those things that were really frustrating their results, and for that reason, they were not achieving the results. So what we did with the team, we went and we did a development program with them where we ran the Develop 360, and what came out of there was really interesting. The team had an average to potential. However, in that average to potential for this role, there were about 51% of the team had a high potential, but were underperforming their potential. And this was obviously because of all these issues that I mentioned earlier on. And so when we debriefed the individual results, and then we later on debriefed the team's results from a 360 perspective, there were a lot of aha moments for the team. There were a lot of insights. So we had to help them understand themselves as a team from the data that we received with these 360 develops. And we had to make them understand where they stood from a self-awareness perspective, because a lot of them, their blind spots came out and they didn't know what they didn't know that their colleagues mentioned in their performance 360. And once we were over that and they saw themselves from the mirror of how their colleagues perceive them, it was such powerful conversations that we had with the team. And from those conversations, then they realized what they needed to do. So one thing that I think the learning agility from the Develop 360 helped us with was that this little spider web showed us where their strength was. And this was in results agility. So as a team, they work very well under pressure and they remain goal focused when pressure hits because they want to achieve results. So we went back and we looked at how their KPIs were written. And we also realized that they were quite unclear, and to an extent, they were quite vague. So because they have a high results agility, we needed to tap into those agilities and speak to that. So that self, that is high on result agility, we needed to tap into that person and speak to the results. So we decided that let us look at the department's goals and cascade those into actionable KPIs. So once you show the team where they fit into the larger goal of the business, then it becomes easier for them to understand how they fit in and how their role impacts the larger strategy of the business. And that way they started understanding that if I'm not at work, or I'm creating an overtime backlog, or I'm making careless mistakes, then this is how it affects the larger organization. Instead of just my little team, it affects the department, and this is how my department affects the entire business. So we had to cascade that, and our partner for performance does exactly that. So when we do on board a department, we first understand their potential to performance as a team. Once we understand that, then we go into unpacking the team's results and what that means in terms of collaboration, in terms of teamwork, in terms of personal preferences, and how you are likely to behave and how you are likely to respond to things just in general. And once we are done with that, then we go into cascading of the department's goals. So we go, these are the goals of the business of Uber. And from the goals of Uber, these are the goals of the department, and therefore these are your goals. And when they see that link, it becomes clearer for them to understand why they are there and how important they are to the business. And once they have that understanding, we go back to their overall picture and we say, right, now as a team, your strongest agility is results. And so how are we going to make sure that we achieve our results and drive their results? Because it's already a strong agility, it is easy to tap into that than to have to ask them to develop their mental agility, for example. So we said to them, lean on the strength and let's see how it works for you. And once that was done, 12 months later, when we went back to the team and we reviewed their results, their overtime spent had been reduced by 36.2%. Their sick and unpaid leave, which was extremely high, higher than most teams within our business, was reduced by 50%. And this was in the last financial year. So we are tracking. And for me, it was quite it was quite amazing to see that now during this pandemic, when I would expect them to kind of fall back and to break a little bit, they really came together as a team. But I also remembered that their results agility are quite high, and they actually increased their targets and they still exceeded their targets. So for the entire financial year of 2019, something that hasn't been seen for 3 consecutive financial years, they had met their targets and they exceeded their targets, and they are still doing that. And that's because they understand their role, they understand their individual potential, and they understand their team's potential. But they also understand their performance, and they are keen to understand and to know how their peers view their performance because of that 360. So the perceptions of their team members has become important to them. The same team members where they didn't collaborate with before. And from a business perspective, the traditional performance management system where we had to rate people and give ratings and then submit those for rewards and for bonuses, for example, was a very tedious process. And it gave almost everyone involved in the process a headache because it wasn't as objective. It was left to what the manager would decide, and all those biases, the halo effect biases, the Covenant biases. So all those things would come into play. But with this new partner for performance, we are able to now say, this is your true measurement of performance based on the output of your results, because when you contract, you are now contracting on clear goals and KPIs, and you know what success looks like upfront. So you contract on success upfront, and you know upfront what that will look like. And you also know upfront what success doesn't look like. So yours and your manager now in performance is to sit and have quality performance enhancing conversations. So the review process then is not necessarily a review process where you sit and you evaluate scores. You now sit and you evaluate what life was in the last quarter and how life should be in the next quarter when it comes to performance. So we're starting to have really meaningful relationships between managers and employees. And we were able to now adequately and properly reward people for their true performance and not from a subjective perspective. So when we did that, we were able to reallocate in this team alone, almost 15% of the bonus pool was reallocated to top performers. And this is because now there is very little subjective performance rating, and everything has to do with how you live of our Uber values. We have a way of measuring that, and how your output is. So both those factors will make up your ultimate performance evaluation. So gone are those days where you have to sit across your manager and your manager will have to tell you this is what you are, basically a number. Yeah, and Nick, I think that's it from me. I think we'll take questions from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Tata. That was extremely insightful, and what an amazing turnaround you guys managed to create. So yeah, well done. I'm going to stop the slide now. I'm going to ask Jaintheran and Linda to come back on camera, and you as well, please, Tata. And then we'll go through some of the questions. So during the registration process, some really great questions came through from the people who are online today. So I'll start with a couple of those. I'm going to throw this one to you, I think, Linda. It's a bit of a combined question. So Tuna Bam and Majamela Donda asked, why do we do 360? Does it really work to have colleagues evaluating each other?
So look, I mean, we needed to test it ourselves to see that it really works. And as Tato says, and this is definitely not a very professional term, but that really was a fraud team. I had my doubts about whether we could actually turn that team around, and we did. And as I said before, data creates insight. And insight is a prerequisite for change. And that 360, because it didn't only say, well, you're good here and bad here, it also said, this is where you've got great potential, but you're underperforming. Let's look at why that is. Is it an extrinsic or an intrinsic factor? And it showed the team that, even if we're not great at the moment, we absolutely can. And it created the insight for them to change. And look at, as a standalone, no 360 is ever going to work. There's a lot of work that you've got to put into it. But for people to actually they have to have a desire to change. So we didn't make everybody be fantastic. We helped them see their potential, and they chose to. So it's definitely been a success for us in that particular team, and we're busy rolling it out in the entire organization at the moment.
Okay, fantastic. There's a couple of questions that have come up in the actual chat now. Nazneen asks, what have you done with the employees who fell in the miscast category? Who wants to take that?
Tata, maybe you know the team intimately.
Oh, you unmute?
So in this particular team, we didn't have a miscast, but in one other particular team, we did have a miscast. And fortunately for us, it was something that was kind of known, but we hadn't scientifically proven it yet. And there were a lot of complaints about this person, and he himself was also saying that he doesn't really enjoy his role and he would rather not deal with people and whatnot. This was in IT. And eventually, when another position in the technical team opened, then this person was transferred there. So when you do have miscasts, chances are you will know, and there could be plans around it. If you didn't know and it gets revealed, then you will need to look at, is there any other roles that you could potentially put this person in? Because a miscast will be a miscast. You can never grow potential where it is not there. So you'll just end up frustrating an employee and frustrating your business unit.
Thank you. Tracy Lansley is asking, particularly for smaller companies, how do you implement this in a smaller company with 30 staff? And how do you stop it from becoming a finger pointing or shaming session?
I wonder if that's not maybe a good answer for Jaintheran, because we have a big company, so.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think this question also relates quite closely to a previous one that I saw about how do you create a performance culture. And I think the crux of it is that when you are thinking about implementing this type of project, you might be in a bit of a conundrum in that to run this effectively, you need a particular type of culture. However, a particular type of culture is the desired outcome of this process. So what do you actually do? Are you just going to give up because you don't have the right culture for it? Our recommendation is that you actually just need to bite the bullet and you need to start somewhere. But also remember that it isn't a one-size-fits-all. We can actually customize the process so it suits where the organization is right now and what the organization's requirements are. And we can configure the 360 and the develop and so on in particular ways, depending on what the levels of trust are in the organization, what the desired outcome and so on are. It also then becomes really important that we do observe those best practices. And some of the most important things for me are, firstly, the individuals in the organization mustn't perceive this as something that is being done to them, but rather something that they are actively participating in and that they have some sort of control and power over. Okay. And then the other thing is that there must be an outcome from running this project. You can't just gather the data and not do anything with it. That's probably the worst thing that you can do. And it's probably taking one or two steps backwards. So even if the results don't look the way you want them to look, you do need to complete that loop, share the information with the individuals, and then decide collaboratively what to do next. And then in terms of the actual design of the process, because we don't report in terms of the stakeholder groups, but we rather say to the individual, this is how you perceive yourself, and this is how everybody else has perceived you. So the chances of finger pointing and so on do become reduced. And also we try to ensure that the way we select the people that are rating you is done in such a manner that it does represent all of those individuals that you have working relationships with. So for example, if you have 20 subordinates reporting to you, it's not going to be representative to ask 3 employees to rate you. We might ask maybe 50 or 60% of those individuals to rate you. Okay. And then the briefing sessions, once again, become important. So we don't just talk to the people that are being rated and that are being measured. We also talk to the individuals that we expect input from. And the intention of that session is to explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, how is the information going to be used, and what you can expect. So it's pretty much, once again, related to the SCARF model, as Tato explained. When there's certainty about something, it's more likely that people are going to perceive it as a reward situation rather than a threat situation.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben.
If I could just add, we did build up to this point, and we did quite a lot of work on leadership development. So we've been building up to this for a very long time, probably in excess of 5 years. But you don't always have the luxury of doing that all the time. And so as Jaintheran says, you've got to start somewhere.
Sure. Tato, Susan Govender is asking, Tato, how do you use your organization's value to measure your employees?
So in our Partner for Performance, we have said that your results are as important as how you live our values. So we have 4 values, and each of the 4 values will have about 7 behaviors that would underpin those values. So for example, we have knowledge as a value, and we'll have, like I said, about 7 behaviors that says this is how we will know that we are living this value. And at the end of the performance cycle, then we have another a platform that people randomly will recognize you and give you high fives. And when they do that, they tag a value against that. And we take those at the end of it, and we tally them up for a person. And it has, so you have to give recognition, that's a must, and you have to receive recognition. So if you don't receive it, you would have given it in any event. That means that you are living our values, and that's how we've incorporated it. So we have like a formula that we've developed.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Takani is asking, how easy was it to find a common strength for the team? What if there isn't a shared strength? Can the tool still be effective?
Can I answer that just, Jaintheran, and then I'll hand over to you? You can, because you get individual reports and you also get a team's analytics. So a team's analytics takes from all the individual reports, and it gives you that web that I just showed you now, where you can see each agility. And besides that, there's also competencies. For example, with this team, one of their lowest competency was accuracy. And they need accuracy because they deal with client interactions and they do a lot of data loading. So in that instance, they need accuracy. And as a collective, when they saw that as a collective, this is quite low for them, they wanted to come together to kind of up their game. So you find commonality, you look at the entire report and you look at where can you find cohesion, or can you find commonalities that can bring the team together instead of singling out people. So I've found that when you speak in one language as a team, you praise them as a team, you recognize their weaknesses as a team, then it's easier for them to kind of come together and hold each other accountable and want to pick each other up.
Fantastic, thank you. Do you want to add anything onto that, Jaintheran, or can I move on to the next one?
Yeah, I think Tata's covered it.
Perfect. Jaintheran, there is a question for you that came in from Aneta Hayward in the survey questions. She asks, are performance ratings outdated? What is your opinion of companies that have scrapped performance ratings altogether?
I think performance will only become outdated when performance of an organization becomes outdated. And I think we can agree that that's the very reason that organizations exist, and that is to perform. And given that an organization's performance is dependent on individual performance, then I don't think that consideration of individual performance is outdated. Maybe methodologies might become outdated, but I think at the core of it, the essence of evaluating performance, that isn't going to become outdated. And the action of actually reflecting on one's performance is actually developing self-awareness, and this can also be extrapolated to the organizational level. And self-awareness is a central component of remaining agile in a dynamic, changing type of context. So organizations that don't reflect on performance, individuals that don't reflect on performance, are actually setting themselves up for failure in future.
Cool. And we've got just time for one more question. I'm going to again throw it to Jaintheran. A number of people in the pre-survey questions have been asking this. Came from Frangie, Caroline, and Vivian, all around the same kind of thing. How do you ensure that this process is bias-free and ensure objectivity in peer reviews? Also making sure that it doesn't become personal and avoiding conflict. How do you get?
Okay, so the first thing that I want to mention is that we are not going to deny that a 360 approach is inherently biased and subjective. Okay, we don't want to deny that. We don't want to hide from it. And one of the reasons is that we have already said that we need to put humanity back into the workplace. So we are doing this to gather evidence about what people think about us. And because it's based on individuals' perceptions, their experiences of you, and that is obviously colored by their biases, however they may have come by those, their perceptions are their reality of what is going on. So we can't deny their reality. What we need to do is get a sense of how are they experiencing other individuals and what can we actually do about that. And what we try to do to minimize the impact of, for example, extreme ratings. So I have seen situations where you have an individual that has set out to sabotage the process for whatever reason. Maybe they are dissatisfied with the organization. This is quite rare, but I have had the misfortune of coming across it once. That individual's extreme ratings could possibly skew all of the ratings. But by ensuring that we have a balanced view of who's rating the individual, then we can ensure that the individual gets quite a fair and valid perspective of how he is being perceived by other people around him. Okay. And once again, referring back to our best practices, some of the things that we include in the best practice is, for example, a rater selection policy, where we would say things like, if two individuals are involved in a formal HR grievance process or disciplinary process, then it's probably best not to include them in each other's surveys. If it is a known fact that there is an interpersonal issue between two individuals, it's probably best not to include them. And all, once again, coming back to the question about the culture of the organization. Is the organization ready for this type of intervention? And as I indicated previously, sometimes you just have to jump in it and actually make that first step to start developing the culture towards it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we are at the hour. It has absolutely flown by. We could probably carry on for hours, but we obviously need to be cognizant of everyone's time. So that will basically wrap up today. I just want to change you around, bring you up there, and just make mention of our up and coming webinars. So today is done. Our next HR Indaba Network webinar is Back to the Office or Not. This is brought to you by Oracle on the 4th of November. And then after that, on the 11th of November, brought to you by Compliance Online, discussing policy perfection. Please visit chro.co.za/events to sign up for both of those, and we hope to see you there. Thanks to our panelists today, Linda, Tato, and Jaintheran. It's been great. The audiences from the chat seem to have absolutely loved it. So again, thank you for your time. Thanks today to everyone who joined us, and we will see you soon.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Ciao, ciao.